Should we have a look at the game? Where did this game rank as in terms of World Cup finals for you guys?
I thought it was unreal. I really did. I knew it wasn't going to be high scoring. So firstly, I should say I picked it the other way. I can't remember. It was maybe like a 9-8 thriller that I picked and predicted in favour of the All Blacks at the start. 1 point game. Absolutely phenomenal. Had everything. And, we always say it's one for the purists. I think it kind of was. But being in the stadium and wondering whether or not the atmosphere would be incredible if it was going to be like, say, a France-Ireland one. That was the big talking point over the last few weeks. The energy out of France has gone because them two teams are out. The atmosphere was absolutely electric in there. Two very well-supported teams, but obviously a long way from home. So there were some neutrals, there was some French singing, there was a bit of swing low. That was it. There was a couple of kilts knocking about as well. But in terms of the energy, the atmosphere, and what we saw on the pitch was unbelievable. It's hard, when you go to these big events, right? You're watching them, but there's so much kind of going on, isn't it? It's almost like a bit of a carnival, which is what we kind of want with rugby as well. We've spoken about that. But watching it back today, the game was so much better than I thought it was. I said it was one for the purist, and we use that term a lot. But actually watching it back, the skill and the physicality and obviously the jeopardy as well, but the kind of this chess game that people talk about, it was absolutely phenomenal. Every player was up at not their very best, but intentionally at their very best.
Yeah, mate, like Jim said, it had absolutely everything. You talk about drama, you talk about red cards, you talk about yellow cards, you talk about TMO decisions. There was the bunker came into use. The All Blacks down to 14 men after the Springboks flew out the blocks. And it looked like at half-time, Springboks are going to win this comfortably. Kane's been sent off, and rightfully so, and we'll talk about that perhaps in a bit. But the way the All Blacks played in the second half and the way they took the game to the Springboks by playing a completely different brand of rugby to what the Springboks were doing was just a credit to themselves. You just came up short, Andy Rowe, but it was absolute entertainment, I thought. It could have ended up being a bit of a damp squib after Kane got sent off, and it could have been a 20-30 pointer like we saw at Twickenham a few weeks ago between the same two teams. But my God, those All Blacks, they were against the odds with Kane being sent off. They took it to the Springboks, and I just loved it. The whole drama of it, edge of your seat stuff. I wasn't even supporting a team. Of course, I predicted the Springboks to win, but wasn't supporting either team, and I was sat on the edge of my seat watching it. The physicality, the noises for some of the hits that you're getting through the TV were off the charts, and the two greatest teams in World Cup history going at each other in a World Cup, the race to 4 titles, all that stuff, all the drama around the game and what's gone on before. We talked about it with how empty the Springboks tanks were going to be, but whatever they did in the week, however many braais they had, however much biltong they ate, they got themselves ready again and they went to town. It was a brilliant spectacle. Even though it says 12-11 on the score sheet, it was a brilliant spectacle whereby everyone that watched it, whether you were wanting to see entertaining rugby, wanting to see just brute force, that had something for everyone. And they had a TMO coming in quite a lot as well. So I thought it was brilliant. And do you know what? Credit to the Boks. They beat France by 1 point. They beat England by 1 point. They beat the All Blacks by 1 point in the final. And they have gone to the well and back to go and find something within themselves. Energy reserves. They used their bench. They went 7-1. They took gambles. But as Jim said, every player emptied themselves and took themselves to a level where it was just absolutely phenomenal.
The analogy of a game of inches, obviously Al Pacino uses it. Nothing better can describe that, and you just said it there, Goody. A game of inches, so Sam Cane, we can talk about his red card, which we probably will do. Sia Khaleesi, Cheslin Colby, when he goes for the intercept. Geordie Barrett, when he misses the penalty, a couple of inches to the left. Andre Pollard, when he actually gets the kick, a couple of inches inside. The try that was disallowed, where it was just knocked on by an inch by Arnie Surveyor at the line-out. Like, that is probably the best way to describe it. It was so close. And, going back and looking at what I didn't realise in the stadium, again, because of the energy and the atmosphere and the way my brain works. I know, Goody, you're very good when you do the TV of picking out moments and going back and remembering tries and how they unfolded. Mate, the Springboks didn't score a point after 33 minutes.
I know.
I didn't
Madness,
realise
isn't
that.
it?
They didn't score a point
Yeah.
after 33 minutes. They'd done it all then, in 30 minutes in that game. Absolutely mental. Mate, a privilege. You know what? I just want to say one other thing. Goody, I know you feel the same about this. We've been doing this podcast for years. Like, we've been involved in the game as players, watching, talking about it, getting different players on. I have never been more proud to be associated with rugby. Like, yes, there's been ups and downs during the tournament. There's been talking points. There was talking points in that game. You know, we can talk about some of the off-field stuff if we want and the social media stuff. But as a product, and that game, it was a privilege to be pitch side watching them. And I always say it, they're millionaire players. That they should be paid millions of pounds for doing what they did on that pitch in that final. It was absolutely phenomenal.
You mentioned the TMO. Should we dive into a couple of those decisions, or, I mean, the first one, Sam Cane, fairly obvious red card, right?
For me, yeah. I mean, obviously, it goes to the bunker, doesn't it? So it's reached the yellow card threshold, and how everyone knows now that it's not the TMO making the decision. He shows the foul play, but then Wayne Barnes sees it. It reaches the threshold of the yellow card. It goes to the bunker. And the way you look at it, Sam Cane's a lovely bloke, as we know. You know, absolute warrior of a player, not a bad bone in his body. No history, to my knowledge, of red or yellow cards to that extent of a hit like that. So there's no previous of him always tackling like that. He's got one wrong, and he's made Jesse Creel wear one in the chin, and it's a red card. What we've seen, how it's been, it's a red card every day of the week. Now, I don't want to compare people and tackles and all this stuff, but if that's Owen Farrell making that tackle, the world goes absolutely mad if he doesn't get sent off, right? He's had bans, obviously, off the back of some similar tackles. So you can't then sort of box it off and go, oh, it's Sam Cane, it's an all-black captain, it's the World Cup final, we don't want to see a red card. World Rugby have to follow through with what they've started and how they're managing the game. And as painful as that is, it's the first red card we've ever seen in the World Cup final. It's facts of life. You know, Sam Warburton went through one back in 2011, didn't he? When he got sent off for a tip tackle, captain of Wales. You know, potentially Wales in a semi-final could have beaten France had that not happened. We have to deal with it. It is a red card every day of the week. You know, no mitigation. Some people are like, oh, Jesse Creel changed his body angle late and, you know, there was a bit of a step and then his chin was near the floor. Nah, Sam Cane is always illegal, upright, smashes him in the face, and it's a clear red card. Only thing I do question, though, is why didn't Jesse Creel go for a HIA? Because that's got to be something that everyone needs to look at going forward. I've said it millions of times on this podcast. If you're getting banged in the face and it's with force and a red card, you've got to have a HIA straight away. And it's ironic, a lot of people came back at me on X or Twitter or whatever it's called and said, isn't it ironic that Jesse Creel did one of those early in the tournament, should have been sent off against Scotland, and nothing was even looked at really. And then it happens to him in the final and Sam Cane gets red carded. Felt awful for Sam Cane, but unfortunately, these is the rules.
Jim, you're not so convinced.
I'm shaking my head and nodding, and maybe this is the whole thing around rugby, like understanding, and that we do understand. We do know, like we know the framework and we know when we look at something. But again, when I was in the stadium, I was convinced it should have been a yellow card, not a red card. So that was my feeling coming out, having seen it on the big screen, being there in the stadium, watching it back. Yeah, I think it was a red card, but I think not no. And that's the thing on the highest level in a final. I'm not like you saying 100%, because we'll talk about the Sia Khaleesi one. He's in a bent position, very different mechanism. The thing is, I feel for Sam, and Ian Foster mentioned it after, and fair play, he didn't want to go too much. He didn't want it to be a talking point coming out of the World Cup final that it was a red card. But it was how it happened. It happened so quick, didn't it? And we know that Sam Cane can bang. They said that it wasn't overly powerful. It wasn't a hard shot. It was pretty hard. It was a big old hit. I feel as if I'm not sure, because I actually feel sorry for Sam Cane. I think that's why I'm not saying 100% should have been a red card. Like, ridiculous that he's done that in a final. Obviously, it's a marginal one. But I think it's because I feel sorry for him because of what he's been through. We've spoken about him after the quarterfinal, maybe one of the best performances of the World Cup. I just feel sorry for him. going to go back to New Zealand. I don't know how well, not that well liked, but how much the public warmed to him as captain. And then that's happened. And they were talking about being a David Beckham moment when he got sent off against Argentina. It's not the same. It's not that moment of madness. But that is what we were just speaking about before. It's the inches. And it's massive. But Goody spoke about it. The way the All Blacks played after that just shows that this team are a special group.
In all, Goody, do you think Wayne Barnes had a good game and he got most of his calls right?
I do, yeah. And I'm not saying that because he's English and, I have interactions with Wayne Barnes. But ultimately, there's always going to be contentious things in a game, right, where you could look at a slow-mo, people are putting the still up of Eben Etzebeth's elbow going into someone's face and saying, how was that not seen? And, Wayne Barnes is right there. There's the Quagga Smith turnover where it looks like he's got a hand on the floor. He's also got his other hand on the ball trying to lift it up as well. So, where do you go with that? Do you go penalise the hand on the floor or do you penalise him trying to pull the ball off the All Blacks player? And then there's the Ardie Surveyor one. Barnsley just said, I felt you didn't show a clear release. Then the replay comes and there was a millisecond of clear release, wasn't there, for Ardie Surveyor's penalty in that first half. And there's so much grey in rugby that it's very difficult for referees to get everything exactly perfectly right. But
should they still have been able to take that kick on the Ardie Surveyor one? Should they still have been able to?
Yeah, 100%. That's the feeling he gave. And it was a very tight call that you have to back the referee. What he saw was he didn't feel Ardie Surveyor gave a clear release. And if you're looking at it, you see some players get their hands right up in the air and then go back on. Ardie Surveyor is literally, his hands are that quick, he didn't even see it. World Player of the Year, of course he is, so he's probably super quick at that. But Barnsley never once said, I got that wrong, sorry. Let's clear that up, because people are saying that he said that. He didn't say that at all. He said, I felt you just didn't get your hands off the player and show a clear release. He didn't ever admit he got that wrong. So why are you ever going to say, actually, that's not a penalty, I'm going to turn it round? It's not going to happen. So I thought, listen, every breakdown, and Jim said it before on here, I've said it, you could find 3 or 4 penalties to give to each team, can't you, sometimes? And, a referee has a checklist of, what's the first thing? Well, it's tackler release, tackler roll away. That's the first thing they look for. They're also pretty quickly now looking at the movement of the ball carrier. Is there a double movement? Is he trying to push momentum forward to gain extra yards? That's the second thing they're probably looking for in terms of the first things and second things at a breakdown to give a penalty away. And then it's the third one is probably competing and entry of attackers. So the jackler competing, is he the first man to the breakdown to compete? And if he is, he's legal. If he's a second or third man, you can't compete. And what angles are players entering the breakdown from? So they've got so much to look at. You want consistency and you want the obvious ones being given. And all the ones that are, it's the World Cup finals. There's such a microscope on every decision, especially when it was a 12-11 game and there was a red card and there was so much hype between the two teams, the physicality, everything that goes with it. There's going to be very marginal ones that you could argue for and against. And I think, in fairness to Wayne Barnes, I thought he handled it really well. And, he's going to get more hate from New Zealand like in 2007. I don't reckon he's going on holiday to New Zealand for a while. But
I think he'll be right. He'll be right.
I hope
grown
so,
up
because
since
he got death
07.
threats. Well, you haven't, though, because there's still death threats coming.
Yeah, but there's always going to be those guys on every side. Like, with whoever lost is going to give Barnesy shit, wouldn't they?
Yeah. But I think overall, I thought Wayne Barnes had a very good game. And yes, there's the odd contentious thing, but they're so minuscule around, like Jim said, inches, millimetres, like decision, split seconds. And that is where I think Wayne Barnes got most of the big decisions right and had a good game.
Where did South Africa get it right tactically? Like, was this a game where they made the right calls to win it, or was it just their desperation to win that got them across the line?
Well, emotionally they were there, and that was the question. I didn't think they could get there again, which is a ridiculous thing to say with the road and the side of the pool and all of these things that we've spoken about. It looked like they had that one big game against France in the knockout stages. Against England, they were nowhere near that level. And I just didn't know whether the tank was empty, whether the well was dry. But you saw straight away, and you get a gauge straight away within the first kind of 5 or 10 minutes if a team's on. And my goodness me, just physically they were on. The talking point in the lead up to the game, which we didn't speak about on the pod on Monday, was the 7-1 split, which some people think ridiculous. So firstly, tactically, Rassie and Jacques Nienaber have got the calls absolutely spot on. You're thinking they're going into a World Cup final without a scrum half replacement or a specialist scrum half. Like, it's mental. And Cheslin Colby, yes, as special as he is, we've seen scrum halves coming before. If you think about Italy and the Bergamasco brothers throwing...
Hey, I played in that game. He made me look amazing.
Well, there you go. How bad was that? So I know that Cheslin Colby is not going to have one of them moments where you've got your back row Bergamasco literally throwing plastic bags in the air. But in a final, it's a massive call, right?
Yeah.
And to drop Manny Lebot completely out of the squad, it's a genius in a way. Obviously, they're not going to feel it's a genius call. They would have been devastated. But you saw the emotion of the bench and stuff like that, just how engaged that team are with each other, like how much of a tight group and family they are. They played it exactly right. Their best players, their biggest players stood up. And we'll talk about the All Blacks as well, but South Africa specifically from a tactical point of view, like we know Faf de Klerk's a big game player. Andre Pollard, I've questioned his credentials. Is he going to go and replicate that at Leicester, do you think, Goody? Is he going to win?
I hope so, yeah.
Yeah, hope so. He didn't say definitely. He hopes so.
Yes, he is, Lam. Yes, he is.
Biggest stage, you know? The guy's just...
Biggest plums.
Yeah, the guy has the biggest plums. He's one of them test match animals. And the likes of Ebenet Sabeth, Dion Ferree coming on. We could talk about him if you want. Like, Bongi Mbanami goes off after a couple of minutes, which in the stadium, I thought it was a horror clear out, but actually it wasn't as bad as I first thought from Shannon Frizella. It was more an accident.
It was accidental.
It was an accidental, exactly. It wasn't a dog shot. In the stadium it looked worse, but Dion Ferree comes on, and I was talking to producer Rob about Dion Ferree. He didn't get capped till he was 35. He's 38 years old.
What?
Yeah.
He's 38 years old, and not just that game, having to come on in a final in your second position. Yes, I read this article where he speaks about, like, I've probably played more hooker than I have back row. Well, not the highest level you have it in terms of a World Cup. You've not done it.
Yeah.
And a couple of throws have got astray during the World Cup for him. But his work around the breakdown for 38 years old, the influences he has, the semi-final, I think he had one of the biggest influences off that line-out where he broke out, went round the corner and nearly scored off it. We're talking about a 38-year-old second choice back row who plays hooker in a final. Absolutely phenomenal. So tactically, the personnel, they got it right. We saw Oxenche the week before in the semi-final in the scrum and the influence that had on it. But this was nothing. This was about desperation on your halfway line when the All Blacks are coming and they're down to 14 men and you're down to 14 men as well. I didn't pick anything up tactically, Goody, that I thought that's what's won in the game. It was just literally who's got the biggest balls, and they were identical. But maybe there was just one slightly bigger on the left side for the Springboks.
Looking at it, though, I mean, you talk about the tactics, and you mentioned Dion Ferree there. Is there anyone that looks more South African than Dion Ferree when he stood there? I don't think there is.
One other. Jasper
Peter
Wiese. No, Jasper Wiese.
Oh, Jasper, yeah.
My goodness me. Matt, I think he lost 3 teeth, and he's not even played, so he's obviously lost them in training.
But yeah, I mean, you talk about tactics. The tactics are employed before the game as well as during a game, right? And like Jim said, all those decisions. Imagine being Jean Klein, right? How's he come on in a World Cup final when he was playing for Ireland not so long ago, or trying to play for Ireland? And it was, when he came on, I'm like, geez, he's hardly played in the World Cup, has he, in terms of the big games? But that's the genius and the knowledge of Rassie, knowing the limits that his players can get to and the trust that he has in everyone in that squad. Now, it was all built up around Manny Lebot at the start of the World Cup. They made the biggest of decisions to take him off in the semi-final after half an hour. And then looking at the weather forecast for the final, bringing Andre Pollard back into the starting 15, but then leaving Manny Lebot out completely. These tactical decisions that they've made by Rassie, by Nienaber, Felix Jones, who hopefully is going to ride in on his white horse and save England rugby as well. Now he's got the England job post-World Cup. They are absolute geniuses for every little detail that they've gone into, the understanding of their whole squad. So, you've got Vincent Koch, who was so dominant and a massive reason why they beat England the week before, doesn't train on Monday, and then you've got the trust in Trevor Nyakane or Nkanye. I mean, one of them will be right, so let's hope I've got one of them right. He was... I mean, the best bit was his dancing on the field after the game.
How good. Yeah. That was me. That was me last night.
Was it?
Well, actually, I felt it was me. It probably wasn't. That's how I felt I was dancing.
But yeah, I mean, tactically pre-match and with the selections, they got everything perfectly. In the game, it came down to inches. It came down to Peter Steph making 28 tackles.
Unbelievable.
I mean,
absolute phenomenon.
They weren't just little tap tackles here. They were all, how are you? I'm going to smash the life out of you now. And like the physicality was just ridiculous. How he's walking the next day, I've got no idea. He was an absolute beast.
How do you think Rassie's going to go down as a coach, as a legend, as someone that ranks with other coaches in the world in the history of the game?
It's the obvious.
Best ever.
Best ever. Obvious.
Yeah. Best ever for me, from where he took the Springboks 4 and a bit years ago, where they were, to winning the World Cup in 2019, the emotion and everything, the planning and everything that went with that, to see how they've evolved over these 4 years and then go back to back with, and it's back to back with probably the toughest World Cup tournament ever to win was this one, because of the quality of all the other teams as well. So you go back to the start of the World Cup, we went into it going, geez, there could be 6 teams potentially that win this. We've gone to a lot of other World Cups and it's been 2 teams effectively that could probably win the World Cup. So he has won the toughest of World Cups back to back with massive calls tactically, individually, player-based, how the team has evolved, how the team's gone back to type to win the last few games in the knockouts by 1 point. You can't speak highly enough of the bloke. Yes, there's been some issues around what he tweets, and he's had bans previously, which I think probably were ridiculous anyway. But does he divide opinion outside of South Africa? Inside South Africa, he will be carried on people's shoulders as the greatest ever coach in rugby union, I think.
And what about Ian Foster?
Big fan of his. The way that he's conducted himself with humility, with integrity, very different to Rassie, how he goes about his business. And I go back to the interview after the match, which is the hardest interview I imagine any coach can be sat there in. You've just lost the World Cup final by 1 point. Oh, and by the way, you're not being kept on because you got sacked before the World Cup even started. The way that he's handled himself is a credit to himself. He'll be one of the most sought-after coaches. We can get onto that, like Eddie Jones leaving Australia. If I was them, I'd go all out to get him, but we know that All Blacks don't like to cross over to the dark side and go to, or the light side or the yellow side, to go to Australia. But the way that he's handled himself, the way that he's set up his players, the way that he's backed his captain, the way that he speaks about his team, and the difficulties he's had with the All Blacks, a team that are in transition, a team that haven't played that well, not having your captain fit the whole time and sticking with him and picking him in the quarterfinal. Yeah, I mean, it's quite obvious, isn't it? When you look at what he's been through, I think he's come out of this, having not even won the World Cup, but he's come out of this, I would just say, in a much stronger position than when he walked into the World Cup.
So obviously South Africa have gone back-to-back world champions, first to 4. Is this Springboks side, people are saying that they might be the greatest rugby side ever? Where do you guys stand on that?
Well, Andy Rowe, if you were checking your X stream, your Twitter stream, that's what I said. I said it out there, and then the South Africans obviously loving it, the rest of the world not so much. I think this is the greatest rugby team we've seen, and Goody mentioned it on the pod today. I've mentioned it last week, the week before. The path they've had to walk in this World Cup is tougher than any other team in any other World Cup. To go back-to-back, people to speak about a dynasty. Obviously, the All Blacks did it in 2011 and 2015. There is argument to say that that team, with the likes of Mar Nonu, Conrad Smith, Dan Carter, Richie McCaw, Kieran Reid, Ali Williams, Retallick when he was there, Whitelock, Mully Aina,
Sonny Bill,
like these players. Hey, don't say Sonny Bill. I've said he's one of the goats of the game. People are like, what the hell are you talking about? Of course, Sonny Bill's a goat. But for me, because they've gone back-to-back, because of how they've played, because of the way I love the way that they play as well. But look at the team. Like I was going to say, look at the team. You'd have all of these teams in your World 15. They've only got one in the World 15, which is mental.
Ridiculous.
I think this is the greatest team we've seen. Very different to that All Blacks team, Andy Rowe, of 2015. Play a very different brand of rugby. But in this day and age, and the rugby's evolved a lot over the last 8 years, and with how good France were going into the tournament, Ireland, the best team in the world, being in a pool with Scotland as well. And the way that they won that final and the semi-final the week before, I think they go down as the greatest team. And some people will hate that, but I'm telling you now, the masses will love it.
Yeah, I kind of agree and disagree. And you still think that 2015 team of the All Blacks was so far ahead of everyone else and so good. Bowden Barrett was there as well at that time. But they were by far and away massive favourites to win that World Cup. So when you talk about how South Africa have won this World Cup, the greatest team ever, on paper you're probably saying 2015 All Blacks, but the way they've won this back-to-back World Cup, you have to say South Africa are equal to that team, but in a very different manner, I think. And the fact that they only got one player in the World 15 Team of the Year, I don't know whether that's an absolutely ridiculous statement from whoever picked it, or it's a tip of the slipper to the South African coaches for actually not being so reliant on certain individuals. It's more about the team, with players rotating so much that they actually, Etzebeth's the only one in it. He got hooked off after 45 in the semi-final. He came off 60, was it, in the final? And other players in other countries for other teams, if they're the big main players like Etzebeth is, they don't get taken off. But that is a strength of South African rugby, bringing the other guys in. So maybe it's because of the balance of how good so many South Africans are that they don't need such standout players. You take Ardie Savea out of the All Blacks, and who's coming in for him instead? The next player's nowhere near Ardie Savea's level, and that's not a disrespect to the next players. That's respect to how good Ardie Savea is for the All Blacks. But South Africa, they bring player after player after player in that all seem to have played and play at a very high level, so there's not a drop off, and that's why they've got such squad strength and why they're world champions.
Pod.
Rugby pod.